Mazda is proud to have been named the best SUV brand by U.S. News and World Report. Right now, get 0% for 60 months on both the Mazda CX-30 and the Mazda CX-50. Experience the Mazda difference and save thousands at Baton Rouge's Mazda dealer, Team Mazda on Airline.
It's very ironic that the place is called Joy because it's literally like the most joyless place I've ever seen.
Joy's Early Learning Center. It's a daycare in Prairieville, owned and operated by mother and daughter Vicki and Gabrielle May. It is meant to be a safe and nurturing environment, but according to some former teachers and parents, it has turned out to be anything but. Michelle Danos is one of those parents, and beyond thankful that a now former teacher at the daycare reached out to her with what allegedly happened with her daughter, Melody.
When Melody walked in, the daycare owner looked at her in the face and said, "We are not going to bite today, right?" Well, Melody tried to walk away. The daycare owner grabbed her by the arm and pulled her back and grabbed her under the chin and made her look at her in her face and said, "We're not going to bite today, right, Melody?" And then she let Melody go, and as she walked away, she said, "Your parents should be spanking you, in my opinion."
Michelle and her husband made the decision to pull Melody out of the daycare. They then took to Facebook last year, hoping to warn other parents to do their research before choosing a daycare. That post had a ripple effect, bringing parents out of the woodworks.
I immediately messaged Michelle and I said, "My son goes there. What happened?"
We were on our phones probably for like 2 weeks straight, answering emails and text messages and messages on Facebook of other moms and other dads having other horror stories of things happening to their kids at the daycare.
Very soon, the parents created a community where they could share stories about what had allegedly happened to their children.
My son went there. We were there for about a year, and in November of 2022, I picked him up from school, and he had a scratch mark on his face that kind of looked like a fingernail indentation, and so I asked him what happened, and he said, "My teacher grabbed me by the face because I wouldn't lay down on my nap mat."
That's when Anne-Marie spotted the daycare owner, Gabrielle May, during carpool and tells us she asked her what happened.
Very rudely, she looked at my son and she said, "Who did that to you?" And he said, "You did it to me." And she was like, "Don't lie to your mom. Stop lying. Why are you lying?" Like just over and over calling him a liar. And he started hysterically crying and was like, "I'm not lying. I promise I'm not lying." So we get in the car. He's still crying and he's, "Mom, I promise I'm not lying. There was glue on my pants. I didn't want to lay on my nap mat because it would get it dirty." And she grabbed me by the face.
She says she did notice glue all down the side of his pants and even took these pictures, but decided to drop it. That is, until she saw the Facebook post and circled back to what allegedly happened to her son.
All of this came out and I was like, okay, so my child was not lying. And obviously this really happened and she's just a really good liar.
But that's not all the parents. Adriana says it was late September when one of the daycare teachers was going the extra mile to get in touch with her.
She told me that Gabby assaulted my son physically, that Quinlan had been misbehaving. Somehow he had gotten out of his classroom around pickup time, which I feel like shouldn't have even been possible to begin with. And he knocked down a picture frame. And so Gabby, the owner, picked him up by the hand and dragged him and just kind of tossed him into a wall for timeout.
But this mother gave Gabrielle May, or Gabby, the benefit of doubt because she says every time she asked her how her son was doing,
they always told me, he's a great kid, he's doing awesome. And so I was like, okay, I didn't think anything was wrong. He's always been very clumsy. So he'd frequently come home with scrapes and bruises. And majority of the time I did not get a report about what was going on. But I've seen him trip and fall over nothing many times.
These are just some of the parents Unfiltered with Kieran interviewed, but the list of those wanting to sound the alarm about the alleged mistreatment to their children at the daycare under Gabrielle and Vicki May's watch is much longer. And parents are not the only ones speaking up. Former teachers at the daycare also spoke to Unfiltered with Kieran.
I had reached out to a lot of parents that I was really close with, telling them that I had been fired due to her basically child abusing children, and that it had been going on for a long time.
Sydney Dominguez recounted some of the alleged horrors she witnessed while working at Joy's.
I think he's autistic, but he was 3 years old, and basically from the morning until the time he left, they had him in this little lunch chair where they would put him in, and they would keep him in there all day. While the other kids are running around playing, they would keep him in there. Outside was basically the only time that he really had any free time where he wasn't put in the chair.
The teacher added if she took the child out of the chair, she was reprimanded. She said she was also told not to help the toddlers take their mats to rooms or help with their bottles. Her allegations against Gabrielle went on.
A baby was sick, running 103 point something fever. Mom was not picking up, and he was very fussy. Gabrielle May picked up the baby and changed the baby because the baby had a bowel movement out of his clothes. Told the baby that she effing hated it and wanted to throw it against the wall. And then I reported it to DCFS. They came and investigated her and asked her questions and asked me questions, and nothing ever came of it.
Unfiltered with Kieran did reach out to the Department of Child and Family Services, but they said they could not comment on the case.
I have had to tell them about an incident where a little boy under the age of 18 months got burned due to two other teachers neglecting him. And then I've had to tell state about the incident with the little girl who was being yanked.
Sydney claims that her hours were cut and alleges she was penalized on her paychecks before ultimately being terminated for, quote, false accusations. But she added that she and another teacher, who asked to remain anonymous, did tell the Department of Child and Family Services several other things they claim to have witnessed while working at Joy's.
As far as leaving children alone in the morning time, if a very young child, like one of the babies, came, they would be put in that little room where it was dark and quiet, and no one was in there watching them because they only had one person on call.
One of the instances, the baby had flipped upside down. The baby was in a swing, and because he was like freaking out so much, and it was too big for the swing, he ended up flipping upside down.
How long did it go before someone noticed?
Honestly, it had to be more than 30 minutes because the baby was beet red and was screaming for dear life, pretty much.
Unfiltered uncovered several infractions by the state issued against Joy's since 2022. Now, by law, Louisiana daycares must meet several guidelines pertaining to supervision, CPR and pediatric first aid, behavior management policy, water activities, critical incident and required notifications, and child-to-staff ratios. In records obtained by Unfiltered, Joy's received a not met status for each of these categories. On September 9, 2023, one report says Joy's failed to notify child welfare within 24 hours that a child received multiple bites and scratches to their face. The records also show Joy's failed to notify child welfare and the child's parents when a child was able to get out of the facility. The child was returned by a bystander later that day. All these infractions are public and maintained by the State Department of Education, the same state agency that oversees daycares in Louisiana. Joy's also failed to meet the requirements for child-to-staff ratios. The report says that 8 children, ages 8 months old to 2 years old, were with one staff member. The report states that 2 staff members should have been present with this number of children.
It was just pretty much, oh, do whatever you have to do to get through the day, or here, I'll buy you coffee if you don't complain. It was never like, oh, let me make sure I have enough staff, or let me close the daycare down, or figure out another way to go through the day.
Several of the moms we spoke to who pulled their children out of Joy's say the mistreatment had a lasting impact on them and their children.
So he is still in speech therapy and occupational therapy. And after we found everything out, I brought him to see a psychologist, a licensed psychologist for young children. And she gave me a handout on trauma responses, and like everyone for his age range, he was showing those signs.
She says her son started a new daycare last year and they have seen noticeable changes.
I thought daycares were going to protect your kids. I didn't think this could happen.
Absolute rage. I was furious and upset that I thought that I could send my kid somewhere that he's supposed to feel safe, and this is what was happening while I wasn't there.
Parents say they had to rely on the teachers' accounts of what was happening with their kids because Joy's video surveillance cameras were reportedly unreliable. It's why the teacher asked to remain anonymous.
It really bothered me that they would start their mornings off being dropped out to someone who loves them. They're crying, and then they get hollered at.
Unfiltered with Kieran reached out to Gabrielle May for a response to this report and all of the allegations of mistreatment.
We have some parents who have come forward alleging mistreatment of their children at your daycare under your care. Any response to that?
We were asked to send an email with questions. We sent this list to her asking for a response to every allegation made by parents and former employees. As of this report and ample time to reply, we have not yet heard back from her. As for these moms, they have plenty they would like to tell Joy's owners.
Honestly, just how dare you? Honestly. She always told me as a friend, you know, Michelle, you should really start speaking up for yourself. And so I'm speaking up for myself and my daughter, because you don't mess with someone's kid. Like, I think as moms, especially with little children, like at the time too, they didn't have a voice, and we're their advocates, and you don't mess with mama bears at all.
I'd probably say the same thing I did tell her. You know, I don't understand how she can continue to expect me to believe that all of these people just have it out for her and are just making stuff up.
These moms have since moved their children to other daycares or made changes to take care of them on their own and now coming to terms with how their children were treated. Their hope is them speaking up will lead you to do your homework on a daycare before sending your children. Reporting in Prairieville with Unfiltered with Kieran, I'm Kieran Chawla.